welcome back. Howdy, neighbors. Welcome to the southern version of the Obvious Choice podcast. I'm joined here by the delightful producer and co host, Amber Reynolds, across the border in South Carolina.
Across the
I'm
border.
your North Carolina native, Ren Jones. You can call me Lightning if you want to. Lightning Ren Jones on your podcast. We've dropped off the Canadian. I don't know if it's permanent, but it feels good so far.
Yeah.
Don't
Up
need
to
to hear from
Mexico.
him today. So, what Amber and I are going to talk about today, in the absence of old boring John What's His Face, is niche. It's a subject that we run into a lot as mentors in the online trainer academy. And we figured what we do today is sort of give you like the TLDR version of this thing. That's too long. Didn't read. I learned that last week. So when Amber said it to me earlier before we started recording, I felt very much in the know. Very millennial ish
Yeah.
when she said that because Generation X don't do abbreviations. But we want to talk to you about sort of the general importance of niche online because we realize sometimes when you come into our process, the Online Trainer Academy, it can feel as if we're limiting you to a certain thing. And it's not about putting a limitation on who you can work with. It's about addressing the limitation that your potential client probably has in terms of having enough information to select to work with you.
hmm
We know you're not confused, but golly, is that a southern word, Amber? But but golly
A little
gosh,
bit.
they're definitely confused. And then we want to sort of troubleshoot niche, some common things that we run into again in terms of mentorship that students bring to us all the time that sort of hampers the whole niche thing. Because one thing's for sure, when students approach us, and you can speak to this probably even better than I can, Amber. You can speak to most things probably better than I can, but let's pretend that I'm important this episode. One thing's for sure, when we see sort of the client that's having trouble and they say, I'm sorry, student that's having trouble and they say, I don't know what to post, or I don't know what kind of programs to write, or I don't know which platform I need to be on. I don't know if I need to be on the platform. We
hmm
can usually, is it safe to say, Amber, that we can usually backtrack that to they probably don't know exactly who they're talking to yet?
100%. They don't know who they're talking to, or they don't understand their ideal client.
Right.
One or the other.
That's sort of in front of the OTA sort of methodology. That's kind of one of the first things you run into in the program for a reason. Because things either trickle downhill or uphill based on who you've decided to talk to. So,
It's the
let's,
foundation, right?
yeah,
So, like, once you know who you're talking to, that influences every single decision you make
everything,
after that. What kind of services to
everything.
offer, what kind of support to offer, um,
Yes,
everything, how you deliver
everything.
it, how often you do things, everything is affected by this. So if you don't have a
Even
solid foundation, your house is going to fall apart. It just
even
the way
if
it
you
is.
get, yeah, that's a great point. Even if you're the type of person that likes to dive into the minutia, sort of mowing the lawn when the house is on fire, you can't even, like, if you care about, well, what's my brand color and what's my logo, even in the absence of niche, that becomes difficult. You can't even distract yourself and procrastinate by doing small things that don't matter. You can't even do that properly if you don't have a good idea of who you're talking to. So Amber, let's let's join hands together, Southern Coalition, and maybe give a little bit of information. The South, the day that the South has risen, is today. We kept saying it was going to rise again. Yeah, here we are, taking over, and we've crossed the border, which pleases me very much. Let's take some yams and some collard greens and maybe some cornbread
Grits.
up to Canada. See if the hockey players like it. But let's talk, Amber, about just the general concept of niche. And I'll let you lead this part of the discussion. Let is a strong word. Let me retract that. I feel bad already by even insinuating that I'm allowing Amber to do anything. Please take the lead and just talk a little bit about niche and why that's one of the first things that a student's going to hear about as they enter the Online Trainer Academy.
So the big kind of misconception with niches, like, okay, well, I have to pick an age range, and I have to pick if it's male, female, or whatever, right? I have
Yeah.
to choose these things, and you don't have to choose any of that, right? The idea is a very specific who, and it could be male, female, other. It could be a specific age range, but it could be a lot of other things. It could be
Hmm.
cultural. It could be life situation. It could be a particular mindset or how they identify, some kind of transition in life that they're going through. So
Hmm.
for everyone that's like, well, I work with people from 20 to 85. Cool. But what's their common denominator,
Right.
right? What's the one thing they all share? And if you can identify that, that just makes life so much easier. So when you're feeling frustrated with your business and you don't know what to do, this is probably the underlying problem. But most people struggle to get niche enough
Hmm.
because it feels like, it feels
Yeah.
funky.
It's it niches being the junior high schooler or middle schooler out on that dance floor at the start of
Mm,
the fall dance. Nobody else is out there yet, right? You
yep.
just feel isolated on the dance floor, and in that example, you've got two choices. You dance harder, or
Hmm.
you sulk back to the dark corner where you were standing
Oh,
against the wall, and then you get talked about in the cafeteria for the next week. Um, don't be that person. Don't be
yeah. Might
talked
as well
about.
dance harder.
Yeah, dance harder. So Amber, when we talk about niche, and you hit the nail on the head there, finding a common denominator. Like, where does the coach should the coach themselves try to find if they're a part of that common thread? Like, from your perspective, is that important? Should it be an outward extension and connection of something that the coach has experienced or has a direct tie to?
No, not necessarily. It's helpful. It makes things easier. I mean,
Right.
like, you're the perfect example of this, right? Like, you
Yeah.
may not be your ideal client, but you study your ass off to learn about them. And that's the difference. Are you willing to do the uncomfortable part of insane amount of research, hearing uncomfortable things, and
Hmm.
having those conversations and being humble, because this
Yes.
isn't your area of personal experience.
Hmm.
If you're willing to do that, 100%, you don't have to be your ideal client, but
Right.
you have to be willing to do the work. And you've been doing that forever, and you still
Right.
have things to learn, right? And you know that. And so if you're not willing to do that, then you probably want to stick to something that you at least share something with to make it easier on yourself. So
Right.
there's no right or wrong answer there. It's just, what work are you willing to do?
That makes sense. I think that one sort of commonality amongst sort of the population of coaches who are going to go online, maybe even specifically coaches with more experience in person, might have a more difficult time sort of niching down because they probably work with I mean, unless you're Eric Cressy and you're working with left-handed Major League Baseball players, right? Most of us have worked with a range of humans, right? Um,
Mm-hmm.
and one thing that I learned from John, and one thing that I repeat when having conversation with our students, is your first niche is probably something that you didn't notice, and it's probably proximity or
Mm-hmm.
geography, right?
Yep.
Like, even if you work with a broad set of people, you're probably working with people because the space that you train is on the way to their job, or near their home, or near where they get groceries, or close proximity to where they stalk an ex. Like, something like that is going on. And the first thing that you lose online is the advantage of proximity. You're
Yep.
you're in South Carolina, I'm in North Carolina. Generally speaking, I'm not going to get an opportunity to coach any of the people that you work with in person because I'm just not close enough. Um,
Yep.
but when we get online, well, all of a sudden we have access to all of the population that's on the internet, right? So you lose geography, and that's one of the first, I think, misconceptions when our students go online. They feel like, well, I can work with everybody. Yeah, you can, but now there's just too many everybody's. And there's too many coaches, and the people that need coaches aren't really great at differentiating. They don't know a CSCS from a CPT from a CES from a P and what, like, that means nothing to them.
Exactly.
So
Mm-hmm.
they're trying to figure out who helps people like me. And we
Mm-hmm.
have to be willing as coaches to say, to announce, even to study, to create content that says, I help people exactly like you. So you sort of want the person in need to feel like you built your entire business for their personal issue, whatever that is. Um, do you find it more challenging, Amber, when there's more experience on the other side of the Zoom call, particularly personal experience? Like, it's a little bit more, well, not
Yeah.
really difficult for you,
Well,
but
it's it comes with some innate stubbornness, right? It
yes.
requires a lot of humility and humbleness to take a step back to say, yes, I can help everybody, but because of the situation, I shouldn't.
Hmm.
It's kind of, if you think of like your friend groups, right? Like you could be friends with everyone, sure. But
Right.
who are the people that you talk to the most? And I can almost guarantee you, you have maybe different factions of group friends and they
Hmm.
share a common denominator. This is the
Yes.
exact same thing. Just because you can be friends with everyone, there's a different amount of work involved, you know?
Right.
And like, I know
Right.
all of my favorite friends have a certain thing in common. And
This is
so
true.
this would be the same thing.
That makes sense. So let's sort of dive into some things that we've seen and
Yeah.
kind of troubleshoot them a bit, because these conversations about niche, and look, first of all, we hear the collective eye roll out there in the
Mhm.
training and business community when we say niche. Like, it's one of those ad nauseum things. Like, it's a common thread amongst business coaches to either love niche and talk about it all the
Mhm.
time, or some people have built their entire platform on hating it and telling you how
Mhm.
irrelevant it is. So one way or another, it's being talked about. But we get it. Like, you kind of heard about it before, but hopefully, hopefully this exercise of troubleshooting will give you some aha moments, right? Maybe shift your thought process a little bit, because it really can be very challenging to execute on the rest of your business as an online specific. And we're having this conversation about online coaching,
Mhm.
building the online side of your business. Let's be clear about that. It can be really challenging to build the rest of your online process when you don't have a really pinpoint target on who it is that you're working for. So one of the things that we see, Amber, is sort of the niche generalizer, right?
Mhm.
They feel like they're niching down, but you know,
Mhm.
they've niched down to. We had a question in our group last week.
Mhm.
Gentleman, I think it was a gentleman, asked about his niche. He said, "Here's what I've come up with based on my personal experiences," and he said it was people who feel nervous about going in the gym. And he was like, "Hey, I'm properly niched down."
Yep.
And he got a few replies from us about that. Like, in that case, Amber, what's the consideration there for, is that niche down, right? Or is it still kind of general? Like, what are your thoughts in a situation like that, where the person feels like they've done the hard work of really isolating a type of person, and maybe they didn't?
Yeah, it's missing some part of the formula, right? Like it's a great piece of information to have,
Right,
but as a coach, we always know that top layer of information is superficial. So
right,
like what does that actually mean? Right? So people who are scared to go to the gym. Okay, scared of what?
right.
you know, and then what of that? And then why of that? Right? You have to play the what and why game until you get to the very bottom of the barrel. So yeah, that's a good place to start.
So as we so if we're let's say you and I had a niche workshop. We're both starting out. We own the North and South Online, right? That's the name of
Mhm.
our company. And or it could be blue and gray. whatever Southern Civil War things you can think of. So, and we say we're going to help people who are frightened to go in the gym, like, and then some jerk in a hat from OTA,
Mm-hmm.
some a black guy from OTA says you need to niche that jerk. You need to niche down a little bit more. Like, what do we start to consider? Like, let's sort of workshop role play it. Like, how would we get down to an actual niche from there? So, any initial thoughts? Like, we're like, okay, Amber, we gotta, like, we know we want to work with people who are frightened to go to the gym.
Mm-hmm.
Like, what's the next question? What do we dig for? I guess why are they frightened to go to the gym? Is that the appropriate place to start? what
Yeah,
what,
that
what
would
would
be
your
a
thoughts be?
yeah. Why? And then they're probably going to say, well, a bunch of reasons.
Right.
Well, because they don't want to be made fun of. Okay, made fun of for what? Oh, because they're overweight. Okay, well, how overweight? Okay, now, how long has this been going on, right? Is this
Right.
new because of some kind of, personal life transition? Is it something they've dealt with their entire life? Okay, great. Is it because of behavior? Is it because of some kind of predisposition to something? Like, there's so
Yes.
many
Yes. There's so many
places.
ways to go. So let's say two things that came to mind immediately for me when you said that is, if they're in a larger size body, it could
Mm-hmm.
be that they've always been in a larger size body. So
Mm-hmm.
there's been teasing and bullying from, elementary school on up, right?
Yep.
That's one scenario. Another could be, they had been in shape for many years, and been in shape's not the right word. They had an aesthetically fit looking body for many years, and an illness happened, and now because of the medication and or the restricted movement, the size and shape of their body has
And then
changed.
what was
um,
the illness? Was it because
right,
of
right, what was
cancer?
it?
Was it
Right,
because of a broken leg? Was it a
right,
car
but it's
accident?
but don't just those. We only went a layer deep, y'all
Mm-hmm.
listening out there. But Amber, clearly there's a difference between someone who was always in a larger body and always sort of was privy to like external and self judgment, versus a person who's been fit before, visibly,
Mm-hmm.
fit, and something happened, and now they're in a different body. But the two approaches are very different, aren't they? Like,
Oh yeah.
between a person who's always felt sort of ostracized for their body shape versus a person who, for lack of a more emotionally intelligent term, versus somebody who's touched that brass ring once and had it taken away from them. Like, I hope the listeners can see how wildly differently you would approach that. And how your story would intersect. So we got that difference, right? And then we've got the difference in programming. Now that we've gone just one layer down, because in one case we be programming exercise for someone who has obviously exercise experience. They'd been, as we say, visibly fit, societally fit, however you want to approach it. We're not going to get into the morality issues here, but you
Mm-hmm.
know, they've been a fit person. They maintained it until some unforeseen incident came up. Wouldn't your exercise programming be different in those two cases, Amber?
100% would be. Yes.
I mean, you're not going to approach with quite the kid gloves that you might. You're not going to probably need as much educational uh, uh, content in your coaching program for the person that's sort of been there, done that. It's probably going to be more so about getting them restarted and getting them to resolve to the fact that, hey, we can't start where you were previously, versus the other person, and everything is probably going to be brand new to them. So you made a good statement earlier about some of the questions that you might think about when considering a very, very broad niche. And in this case, with a person that's afraid to go to the gym, could you sort of run down those, like, as soon as it popped into your mind, sort of the questions that you might ask yourself again, just because these are probably pretty universal to most niches that are underdeveloped should we say? So
Yeah,
so
it's any W question, right? Who, what, when, where, and add an H, how, right? You can
right.
add that to any niche. Okay, which one of these? When did this happen? How did they get there?
Mhm.
What is their life like? You can play that game. Usually with
Yes.
students, what I'll have them do is go 7 layers deep and say which one
Nice.
of those. Okay, I want to work with people who are afraid to go to the gym. Great. Which one of those? I want to
Yes.
work with people who are quote unquote overweight and are afraid to go to the gym. Great. Which one of those? All right, and you just kind of keep going until you're 7 layers deep. And that's probably where you need to be, is those kind of two bottom layers. Um, it'll feel uncomfortable, but your vision for your
Yes.
your business is so much clearer down there.
I tell you, I would say you haven't hit it until it feels uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Like you haven't arrived until you're like, this isn't going to work. That's probably where it's going to work. But
Yeah.
but but it truly, like, and this is a question that I get all the time, and I don't know if it's actually asked verbatim more so than it's sort of inferred through
Mhm.
the student. But settle this once and for all, Amber. Is there such a thing in your mind as a niche that's absolutely literally too small? Is it really possible to go just so far down that there's just no, well, obviously it's possible, but is there a likelihood that you'll niche down so far that nobody will resonate it? The photographer that does the ski engagement photos comes to mind. You told a story about wedding engagements, specifically in
Mhm.
ski and
Through the
snowboard
years.
environments. But
Mhm.
what's your answer to that question? Is it
I
possible?
mean, if
I mean, I
you
guess it's
need
possible, but is it
50%
likely?
or it's not likely, right? Like if you
Right.
need 50, most coaches need no more than 50 clients. In a planet that has 8 billion people on it, chances are you can find 50. Some are easier to find than others, certainly.
Right.
But I mean, there's literally a Facebook group for people who buy the 20-foot giant Halloween skeletons, and it has 200,000 people in it.
Oh my god.
They just love this freaking 20-foot skeleton, and they show pictures and stuff of it in different situations. I mean, there's 200,000 people just of that. I mean, like, oh my gosh.
Oh man.
So,
When I die, hopefully I'll go to heaven or someplace, along those lines.
yeah.
I'm gonna ask whoever runs the show. Can you just show me all the groups that Amber Reynolds was in on Facebook? Uh, and I'll probably spend an eternity surfing through those
Yeah,
as my soul is blessed.
yeah, it
Because
happens when you have a
I was today
ADHD
years
brain. You
old
love
when I
everything.
was today years old when I learned that there was a 20-foot Halloween skeleton. First of all,
From Home
um,
Depot.
but thank you, Amber.
Make it more niche.
But knowing that there's a group of hundreds of thousands of humans on this planet who are so interested in said skeleton that they congregate to share pictures of it, um, that's news to me. So,
Yeah.
so long story short, the likelihood of you niching down so far that you niche your business out of existence, listeners, pretty slim, slim to none. Um,
And it
get to
doesn't
that.
mean that they're all created equal, right?
Right.
Which I think is one of the things you wanted to talk about today, is not
Yes.
all niches
Yes.
can afford what you have to offer.
That's actually true, and that's a great, it's a brilliant segue from my farther south contributor here. What if the niche just can't buy, right? So we've had these conversations before, and John's cited the example of the coach here that came through OTA who was working with fighters, right? Mixed martial
Mhm.
arts fighters. And for those of you out there listening, if you know anything about individual sports uh, and how difficult it is to get into a ranking position, I'm not talking about a college kid that was a blue chip athlete gets drafted by the professional sports team. I'm talking about like tennis players, fighters, a lot of individual sports athletes. There are a few at the very, very top who are incredibly well paid. And then there's sort of the middle where it's not very lucrative financially yet as you're ascending. And then there's the people that are starting or maybe hobbyists and there's relatively no pay. But this coach worked with fighters, and fighters don't have a lot of money, right? Generally speaking, as they're making their way up in the game, so to speak. See how I use my slang, making it in the game. Um,
Very good.
thank you, Amber. And what did this coach do, Amber? What was their pivot away from trying to get people that could not afford their services so that they could still help that market, but they could get, I mean, they could pay their rent, lights, keep the water
Mm.
running through the faucet. Like what was the pivot there?
So that's the whales and minnows, concept that
Yeah.
John has, right? So in order to serve the minnows, you have to feed the whales. And so in this particular case, he knew that a lot of kind of white collar type guys that have a like alpha mindset love
Yes.
fighters. And so he would train the boxers or fighters for free and then have them post about what he does. And then he was the coach for whatever fighter. And then he created a program, a high end program to learn to, not fight like a boxer, but to work out, how boxers or fighters do
Mm-hmm.
for the white collar alpha type guys. Right. So
Yes.
they could afford what he had, but it allowed him the space to help who he really wanted to help.
Right. Right. And obviously those executives are six-figure business coaches. They're in your inbox if you're looking for a new market to sell to, because they coach people to 6, 8, 12, 13 figures. I don't even know what that is. Trillions.
Mm.
But oftentimes out of passion, which is understandable because a lot of us are in this business because we have some passion and purpose attached to it. Oftentimes out of passion, we will make the attempt to pursue philanthropy more than business because we want to give to a certain population that resonates with our passion, right? And that can lead you to doing, from a business perspective, batshit crazy things like offering, a subscription service for $19.99, which is going to be your own personal hell within 3 months of doing so. It's like I don't know if it's the inner circle, but it's adjacent to the inner circle of hell.
Close. Yep.
Or you find yourself giving of your time, and we love that you give of your time. You find yourself giving of your time in these various communities where you're taking the time out to go and speak to people, but you don't have any income derived from that. And also, it's distracting you from activities that would probably generate income, uh, or you just end up out of the business. Because let's be frank, if your passion is that people get help, well, you can't help them when you're evicted from your house, right? When you have no, we have nowhere to live, and as brilliant Chris Farley would say on Saturday Night Live back in the late '90s, early 2000s, you're in a van down by the river, right? When you're living in a van down by the river, you can't help a lot of people. So you've got to generate income. Um, that tickled me. I tickled myself. You've got to generate income, right? Um, so when you know right away that your particular market, the niche that you feel like you can best serve, doesn't have the ability to actually afford the quality of what you provide, that's not you being disingenuous. Like that's not you being, you're not being an asshat, right? You've got to feed yourself, and some of you out there have families. I don't know what that's like. Uh, Nobody cares about me, but you've got to take care of yourself and your family. How might you pivot what you have expertise in, and how might you pivot the areas where you have authenticity so that you can find another market, an adjacent market that feels like some of those things are really admirable and or it edifies your market. I know that I think that our one of our colleagues, Claudia, and I can't pronounce her last name, but I met her in Canada. I know she's Canadian. She has the Oh my gosh, I can't believe I can't remember the name of her business. But she does a podcast called Something Awesome. I've been on it before. She's French Canadian, really nice lady. But I know she has a background in ice skating, right? Herself.
Oh, that's
She
cool.
has a background in ice skating. And I know that, again, most skaters that she will probably run into are going to be amateurs, right? And they're probably going to be relatively underage. Like they could be in their 20s, but you won't find a lot of mid 40s competitive ice skaters, obviously. And it could be a challenge working with athletes. So, how might you pivot the closeness with these athletes, the authenticity of you working in their real environment, and take some of the admirable things from that population to apply to a different population who may, there may be women out there who are adults and working through life and doing things, and they admire the graceful nature of the athletes, or they admire the mobility of an ice skater. You could very well pivot that into, I help women in their 30s and 40s increase their mobility with specific techniques that I use when I work with competitive ice skaters. Like that could be a thing. So when you're in that area where you're working closely with a group that may not be able to fund the necessary money for what you provide, it's okay to pivot a little bit.
Mhm.
And particularly working in an online space, you don't need a lot of time because things aren't happening in real time if you're doing it online the way that we teach it. And that allows you to dedicate your time to the other demographic, the other population, without being so without having to always be so uptight about your expenses, about your living. Because when you're struggling to get a pack of ramen noodles, been there,
Mhm.
you don't give great service.
Nope. You're not helping them anyway because
You're
you're
not
too
helping them.
stressed out. There's just no way. To give a different example, I don't know if you're aware of there's a sock brand called Bombas. Have you ever heard of
Yes.
these? Okay, right. So when you buy a pair of Bombas, they give socks away, right? So instead of saying, "Hey, how can we make socks for people who are homeless or whoever their intended final product goes to," but instead of saying, "Hey, how can we make it even cheaper so the homeless people can afford it even though they can't because they're literally homeless?"
Right.
Right? They like, "Okay, how can we make money so we can give it away?"
Yes.
Right? So that's the same exact concept. So instead of trying to figure out how can I make it cheaper so they can afford it, figure out how you can make money so you can give it away or give it
Yes.
away significantly cheaper.
The
So
the
just look
un,
at it from a slightly different.
the underlying theme of what Amber shared here is the fact that you have value and worth as a professional in this space. Don't devalue yourself specifically because of the niche that the population that you choose to work with. Ultimately, you don't do anybody any good by doing that, and you're not very likely to complete your purpose, your mission, when you're not being properly compensated for your expertise in your work. So I think we beat that one to death, Amber. But we did have a third scenario, another thing that we run into a lot, and that was when your niche has no one that looks like you in it. This one's near and dear to my heart. So, like, you want to work with a group of people, but you don't have much in common with that group of people, but it's a passion for you, right? And my personal situation was through loss, right? Women in my family passed away due to health related issues or lifestyle related issues. And I decide, well, that's where I'm going to serve, right? I'm going to help. I'm going to work with moms over 30, right? Uh,
Mhm.
I'm way over 30, not a mom, and I'm not even a parent. So,
Yep.
what are, and I'll share what I've done in a second, but I want to be fair on the podcast, because John talks all the time, and we know how that feels, Amber. So we don't want to do that to each other. I mean, he's on and on and on and on and blah 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 hockey, blah blah blah. Named my hockey stick Excalibur, blah blah blah. Slept in a cave, got bit by a werewolf, and got married to my wife. And nobody wants to hear that crap. So we're not going to read that in his absence today. But from your perspective, Amber, like, what's the low hanging fruit here? I'm working with the population that's not me necessarily. What would I do? Like, how would I approach that? What are your thoughts?
You're doing a lot of listening.
Yeah,
A
yeah,
lot of listening,
yeah.
consuming materials that they consume, not participating, but listening in groups that they're in where they're talking and sharing, um, and just doing an immense amount of research. And
Who let the
Penny says
dogs out?
hi. Yeah. Got one sleeping by my feet here and the other one's yelling at the truck outside.
I love it.
Penny and Aria say hi.
It's how we do things in the South, people.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so, you know, occasionally we get students who want to work with a population that they're not a part of. Now, I'll give you a word of advice. Something that I discovered is maybe don't punch up so much, right? Like, you know, like it's one thing for me to say, I want to help women. It's another thing for someone who's never been an actor to say, I want to work with Hollywood actors. I mean, I support your dream, bro. Like, really. Uh, have you taken acting classes? Were you ever even in a school play? Do you have any connections to television, movie production? I mean, it sounds great. Maybe a little bit of a longer road, right? So be mindful there. I don't like to use the word practical because I think humans are capable of things that aren't practical. Practicality kills too many dreams. But I mean, have some sense about the thing, bro. Like you don't have access to that population in any way, shape, or form other than Netflix. Maybe not yet. Start somewhere else. Work your way to it, or you
Well,
can
and the difference with you too is you have a personal connection to it.
Yes,
Even though you are not the person, there is a personal connection to
yes,
it. So it also makes sense.
right.
So like it would be if I wanted to work with single moms and I have zero connection to that,
Hmm.
then that might be a little bit harder. But where if I was like raised by a single mom and I know from the child's
There
perspective
you
of
go.
what that looked like, there's
There
some
you
kind
go.
of connection there that from an outsider's perspective makes sense for why you're doing it. But
Yes.
we do have to be thoughtful of optics where like if you're 20 and you're talking about time management tactics and staying motivated and all that kind of stuff to people in their 40s, not that you're wrong about what you're saying, but context matters.
Yeah. You,
And
you,
those tips for you, we talked about good information, bad advice, depending on who you are, right? It may be great
yeah.
information, but maybe not for the population that you're talking to. So you do want to be mindful about how things come across. So that's part of the research, so not that you can't do it, but it requires a lot more forethought and excellent communication skills that you have to develop to be able to bridge that gap when you are not obviously your target market.
Self awareness is definitely important. And probably in this prong of the niche conversation, working with a niche that you don't belong to personally, it's probably one of the key elements of knowing what's going on. It's you know, you want to be the opposite of Ron Burgundy from Anchorman, right? He goes on the air and blurts out uh, that he's been making love to the new newscaster, a young Christina Applegate,
I
right?
haven't seen it.
Or Anchorman 2 when he's in a relationship with Megan Good, who's an African American actress, and he's sitting there with her family at dinner. And he's like, "Oh, we be busting nurse like a squirrel, baby. Yeah, all the time. I'm down, baby. Like have some self awareness that you read the room a little bit." But back to the topic at hand, learning more about the population that you're serving with a sense of humility goes a long way, right?
And walk
Go
them through
ahead.
what you've done because you're like the master at doing this.
Yeah, yeah. First of all, I appreciate that. Thank you for reading the message that I sent you through the messages before you said that. I've already cash apped you the $100. So
Appreciate
here's what I did. First of all, like Amber said, I'm adjacent to the population, right? I've got real life experience. Grew up in a house with my mother, my older sister, 13 years older, and my grandmother. All those women are in the house, right? With a little kid, a little male kid, a little boy, and you sort of soak up the experience. Like I couldn't help but soak it. The experience would beat me from time to time, so there's no way for me to not soak it up. Some of it was transdermally. It was yeah, I absorbed some of the experience through the skin, but um, and I was a good kid, man. I didn't deserve it. Topic
Did
for
you have
another
to
time. Yeah,
pick based on thumb size?
yeah, yeah.
So like my parents had to pick their switch based. It had to be bigger than their thumb.
that's that's appropriate.
Yep.
We're deploying a lot of Southern logic to you folks today. I hope you're getting this. Canada, talking to you specifically. So, but that's the first thing. I had some background. I had some relevant connection to the population. I just wasn't just arbitrarily shooting for the moon. But the second thing is really rooted in what Amber already shared. Man, I had to be a damn good listener. I had to listen, 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 because a lot of the time we approach things from the perspective of wanting to shield our ignorance. And that's a mistake in coaching, right? Thinking that you need to know everything is probably more repulsive than it is attractive to any population. Go in there dumb, right? I go into these situations with my dunce hat already on. And I'm like, hey, I don't know a lot about this. I'd love to learn about this. Who's willing to tell me more about this? It's really important to approach a population that you don't belong to with a sense of humility. Amber already laid that out for you. So that's the second thing that I did. I added myself to groups that would allow a male to be in it, right? That's the first thing. So I could just observe a little bit on social media, Facebook and Instagram, not groups specifically, but I just followed accounts that I knew that my population followed. And I'm cisgendered, heterosexual male, trying to figure all this out. So I went to some obvious places first, right? I followed Oprah on Facebook. Just see what the conference. I didn't know where else to start specifically, but I knew that, and I knew that from growing up in a household where nobody missed the Oprah Winfrey Show any day of the week. Like it was a ritual at the house I grew up in, as you might imagine. So, hey, there's a source. I followed Oxygen magazine to see what trainers, what credentialed professionals were telling to athletic, active women. I followed Muscle and Fitness Hers. I followed Mel Robbins once I got a hold of her. Love her or hate her, it's a good choice of information for me about what the community's saying about current events, anything at any given time. So I just found a good spot on the wall, put my fly suit on, got up there, and I just shut up. I didn't buzz around. I didn't talk too much. I kept my information very specific. From there, what I did was I went the credential route. Another great asset of knowing your niche is it guides your education. So before I took like my certified personal trainer, then I did like corrective exercise next. Then I did 2 boxing certifications that I'll never use again because I was a
Did an
hobbyist.
MMA one.
Right, right. And
Did in a
so
weekend.
right, right. So we do that stuff because we're interested in, you get a MACE certification or like, and I'm not downing those things. The more you know, if you like it, I love it. But when you're niche down properly, your educational choices become much more clear, and you're able to project them out over a year. Like I know my next 3 certifications are going to be based on my population. So long story short, then I went and got a certification from Girls Gone Strong for coaching women, a women's coaching specialist. I got a second one for pre and postnatal coaching. Then I started to go through like the arbitrage of the menopause certifications. Right, I've taken 3 different menopause certifications. So I went from a listener, asker, to an authority, answerer, right? I got to the place where I started to know more about the things that my population dealt with than I did. But the important thing is that you still approach that with empathy and humility, right? Answer as many questions as you can find. Even if you don't know the answer, particularly on social media, you don't have to answer right there. It's not a press conference for God's sake. Nobody's shoving a mic in your face. Find the questions that are out there and make an attempt to answer as simply as you can, because we've talked about a lot on this podcast, Amber. You never learn something as well as when you try to teach it, right?
100%
Just
facts.
no comparison. Um, and after a while, also men, if you're working with a female population, uncreep yourself for God's sake. Uncreep yourself, right? If you don't know how to do that, just find me at fitnessjonestraining.com on Instagram or Facebook or LinkedIn or X, Twitter, whatever it's called now. But you got to uncreep yourself. Like, all the women in the population were not sent here for you to try to make a move on them. That for men, that's a quick way to kill your credibility and your notoriety. Um, but in any case, so I started to learn more and got into a position where I could answer questions effectively, empathetically, and and from that point, my content changed, right? So to the third prong of what we talked about. Your programming gets better, your content gets better, your education gets more direct when you're niche down. And quite frankly, if you're not, you're treading a lot of what, like, don't doggy paddle your way through the online fitness industry by just not knowing that there's a direction you can swim in. Like, it's exhausting. You're going, and we see this all the time, don't we, Amber? Like, you're going to get tired in the water treading it, and you're going to drown. And I mean, we've seen countless coaches,
Oh, yeah.
good coaches, like not coaches that weren't great at what they do. We've seen a lot of them pass through OTA and OTM, and poof, and you just never see them again, right? Most of the coaches that do well online for extended periods of time really have a great target for exactly who they're helping. I think I just get bored of shit not knowing. Like, I just get tired of talking about squats every week and vegetables every week and fucking hydration. Like, that's so boring and it's not really helpful. And we know that the pediatric neurosurgeon makes a much better living than the family doctor in your town, right? It's just because they work with a very specific thing. You could choose a lot of different doctors depending on where you live, but typically, if you have a serious life-threatening situation, there's probably like 1 to 20 professionals that you have access to that you can choose from, and that's, if not across the nation, that may be across the entire planet. You want to be one of those guys or girls or people, whatever, non-gender, non-binary. But so that's the thought process about the niche general and the troubleshooting of niche. Amber, is this a good place to put a pin in it? Have we?
It is. I'm actually looking for an episode to recommend
Amber's
while
looking
I'm
for an
doing that.
episode, and I'm going to sing Love Boat. Soon we'll be making another run. The Love
I got
Boat. Oh, you got one?
one.
Okay.
I got one. Yeah.
Go ahead.
I think, especially because with niche stuff, people
Mm-hmm.
also want to target people who can't afford stuff because they're
Yes.
too scared to ask for higher pricing. So, with that in mind, episode 96, raise your prices painlessly.
I love it.
So that way you feel confident to go after the niche that can afford what you should be making.
All right, so you guys got an episode now. You can set a course for adventure, your mind on a new romance. Uh, Love won't hurt anymore, guys. Neither will niching down or raising your prices. This has been an un-Jonathan Goodman production, the best kind that we know of. Wherever he is, Central, is he fighting? Is he fighting rebels in Venezuela or something? I can't remember where he is.
No, they left Nicaragua. They made it to Mexico late last night. So,
Potato. Thanks for tuning in to the Obvious Choice podcast. I've been Ren Jones, and she's been Amber Reynolds, and the South has risen, y'all. We'll see you next time.
flash your cotton socks.